Welcome in, everyone. You are listening to the Authority Podcast here on the B Podcast Network. Thanks, as always, for being with us. Pleased to have you here for this conversation with my guest, James I. Bond. James is one of America's leading behavioral management specialists. For 13 years, he ran one of Southern California's leading behavioral management firms, working with a who's who of American business. Earlier in his career, he ran an advertising agency in Montreal. He's a past workshop chairman for the resource partner of the U.S. Small Business Administration. He's been a featured guest speaker at 2 Southern California universities, and his book is a 2023 Best Business Book finalist from Publishers Weekly. It's called Brain Glue. James, welcome to the show.
Ross, thank you for having me. Love your podcast.
Well, that's nice of you to say. We'll see. We'll make another episode here that people love. Let's start here. I think this is where the title of the book comes from, but you write about how selling becomes much easier by making your ideas sticky. And we're going to talk a lot about from the perspective of ideas in this conversation and how leaders can leverage your strategies for persuasion, for gaining buy-in around their ideas and moving people. Let's start with, what does it mean to make an idea sticky?
Well, there are certain things that stick to the brain like glue. I'll give you a great example. Okay. Jack and Jill went up I bet everybody knows what the next word is. And yet the last time we heard it was 10, 20, for me, maybe 50, 60 years ago. Okay. Long time ago. And yet it sticks to the brain. I could be on my deathbed and somebody could say, "Hey, James, Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water." I remember it. There are certain things that we remember. I mean, I'll talk about politics. I'm not being political, okay, because it works on both sides. But Biden's Build Back Better, buh, buh, buh. It uses alliteration, repetition of sound. Trump's Make America Great Again, good, which he got from Reagan. But I mean, we understand that when you start to understand that certain things stick to the brain like glue. Coca-Cola, Best Buy, PayPal, TikTok. TikTok, if they call it the Chinese social media platform, you think it would be as successful as TikTok? I have one of my daughters who's younger, and I said, "It's Chinese social media platform." He said, "No, it's not." And she did research and went, "Oh yeah, you're right, Dad." But I mean, so when what we want to understand is when we communicate to people, and particularly if we're a leader and we're trying to communicate important concepts to people, if we can use certain of the tools that are triggered in the brain, it makes it easier for people to remember and then to understand and to relate to it.
Yeah, and then it's an important concept. Everybody has been exposed to it in some way, even if they haven't used them as much. It certainly has been used on them, right? But I think there's an element of starting with wanting to connect your ideas with others, which means wanting to understand what would connect, what are people interested in, what are they looking for, right? And then one can start to absorb some of these strategies for making that happen. But starting with thinking about the audience, who are they? What types of things would connect? I mean, what's the mindset for getting started with getting better at persuasion, getting better at selling ideas?
Well, we want to understand what people understand. I'll give you an example. And again, I'm not getting into politics, but they talk about $1 billion. Wow, there's $1 billion, without realizing how much is $1 billion? It's 1,000 times $1 million. Oh, it is really? Like $1 trillion is 1,000,000 times $1 million. People don't understand. We can take 1 million Americans and turn them into millionaires. That's how much $1 trillion is. Whoa, it's really that much? There's a quote that says the average American consumes more than 2.5 million plastic bottles. Well, sorry, Americans consume 2.5 million plastic bottles every hour. Sounds like a lot, doesn't it? What if I told you that's enough to reach the moon every 3 weeks? Would that affect you more? And what happens is we say things all the time and assume that people understand. They don't necessarily understand. And we need to put it into perspective so people understand. When we can do that, it's like I work with Warren Buffett's team. And Warren Buffett has this great line. He said, "Only when the tide goes out do you discover who's been swimming naked." Now, naked is a trigger word. So what did he say? But when you think of that, what you start to understand what he's really saying is only when times get tough do you discover who's capable and who's not capable. But psychologically, we understand on a psychological standpoint that people don't always necessarily understand something if we're saying it logically. And we want to understand that it's the emotion centers of the brain that when you trigger the emotion centers of the brain, you have a better chance of getting people to understand what you're saying. And if I can give you just one quick example, because when I started to understand this, I'm originally from Montreal. And so I had an advertising agency and I had an opportunity to win the anti-drug campaign because I had worked with major clients, Kraft Foods, Timex watches, Avon Cosmetics, Abbott Lab, Seagram's, their world headquarters is there. They said, yeah, yeah. And they sort of pushed me in to say, you guys, you're really good. See if you can come up with a way to talk people out of why they should be not using drugs. And so I came up with powerful, logical reasons why you should not do drugs. And we lost. And who did we lose to? The guy holding the egg saying, this is your brain, and cracks the shell and drops the egg into a sizzling frying pan. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions? And it scared me. First, because I knew this was infinitely more powerful than what I did. But second is this was emotional selling, and I didn't understand how to do emotional selling. So I started saving things that were emotional selling that I could see. And it wasn't just ads, even though I had an advertising agency, it was things like ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country from President John F. Kennedy. That's something called chiasmus. I didn't even know what chiasmus is, but it's a tool like all for one and one for all. You know, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. It's a flip, okay? Malcolm X said, we didn't land on Plymouth Rock, the rock landed on us. And because he said it that way, he said, when you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. And when you hear it, that if he says, come on, guys, you got to stand up for something really important, that doesn't resonate as much as using a quote, you know, when you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. And it's just, these are tools that stick to the brain. And just one last thing on this. So 10 years later, I moved to Southern California and I met John Gray. And John Gray was telling me his history. He wrote a book called Men, Women, and Relationships. And people who read the book loved the book, but almost nobody was buying it. But they said, wow, this is the most incredible relationship book ever. So there's a whole story of how he came up with it. But he changed the title to Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and sales skyrocketed. It floored him. He went from 20,000 to 50 million books sold. And this isn't just about selling, but just to understand this, that it's a metaphor. And metaphors is one way that you could help people to understand a concept that's very important. We had a behavioral management firm, and people would say, we would sit because we had PhDs in psychology and organizational development on one side, 22 of them. Then we had senior execs from major firms like Ernst & Young and McKinsey and stuff like that on the other side. And we would sit and they would talk technically to a client, and you could see the look on a client's face where they're going, well, it's really technical. I don't really understand what you're saying, but I guess if you guys can do this, then you're fine, okay? But we realized that we had to come up with a metaphor to explain what it is. So we said, a coach can get you to do more push-ups than you could do on your own. Well, we can get you and your people to do a bigger projects than you could do on your own. And by using the metaphor, suddenly they went, that's interesting. I said, yeah, come on, Ross. 2 more push-ups. You can do it. 1 more push-up. Yes, there we are. We can get you to do it. Well, we do the same thing in a different way, but using psychology, you know, behavioral management, we can get you and your people to tackle a bigger project that you could tackle on your own. And so like metaphors is one of many tools that really help people understand what it is that we're trying to accomplish.
You mentioned the $1 billion, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but it makes me think of an effective technique that I've seen where sometimes people say, like, most people don't really grasp the difference between $1 million and $1 billion. And it's
Right.
something like if you have $1 million and you spend $1,000 a day, you'll run out of money in 2.5, 3 years. If you have $1 billion and you spend $1,000 a day, you'll run out in 3,000 years. Right?
That's right.
That's how much more it is. And that's not, I don't know if that's exactly one of these techniques, but it's kind of thinking about, okay, if I just, there's a lot of ways that you can try to explain that or try to emphasize, no, it's a billion. And a lot of people, they're all big numbers, and it just doesn't the difference doesn't totally measure up. But if you find a way to really illustrate, no, like, this is how much more this is than that. And I guess another way they say it with that, the numbers, is if you have $1 billion and you take away $1 million, you still have about $1 billion.
Hey,
You know,
really, a billion is 1,000 million. So you take
right.
away one, so it's 990. Yeah. But an interesting issue, and this is for us, it was profound in working with our behavioral management company, is that particularly executives have difficulty saying I don't know or I don't know how. People, if somebody keeps saying I don't know or I don't know how, you start wondering, they worry that you start wondering, like, how come we hired this guy? He doesn't seem to know anything. When in fact, if you're growing a business and you're trying to tackle things that you've never done before to try to grow the business, of course you're doing things you don't know or you don't know how, and ask for feedback. Don't be afraid to ask for feedback. But because I work with senior executives, we had that issue. But this applies to almost everybody. You talk to people, I talk to people as a leader. We talk to people in a company, or people at home, even family members, and we think they understand what we're saying, but they don't always understand what we're saying. And that's why we need to make sure that ask feedback, get feedback from people. Like, one of the most powerful tools you could use in human interaction. So what do you think the most powerful tool of human interaction is? I'm using it now, aren't I? What am I doing? I'm asking questions, aren't I? Because questions trigger the part of the brain that wants to answer it automatically. And so there's something called simple reflexive questions. Isn't it, doesn't it, shouldn't it, don't you agree? Are simple reflexive questions that you add to the end of statements. So I had a friend come over and we're going to throw a football around. And so I said to him, so normally I would say, oh, it's a beautiful day. Let's go play. You want to go throw a football around? That's what I would have said to him. But I said, it's a beautiful day, isn't it? Just because it's wired into me. And he goes, yeah. And what does that mean? Does that mean yes, or does that mean something else is going on? Yeah. So I said, why, what's wrong? Nothing. No, what? It's okay. It's okay. And I said, no, what? He said, oh. And he starts telling me about he's having a relationship with his wife that is falling apart and he's afraid they're going to have a divorce. And we had a really nice chat over it. We actually had a great time. But when we're talking to people, we assume they're listening. We assume they understand. But if we add simple reflexive questions, does that make sense? Do you agree? What do you think? Isn't it, doesn't it, isn't that good? Isn't it, doesn't it, shouldn't it, don't you agree? When you add those, it's amazing how you suddenly become much more aware of people, whether they're understanding what we're saying or not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. How do you, well, and we'll talk more about, well, you mentioned a lot of them already. We'll talk about some of these techniques, but I'm wondering, how do we use the techniques to simplify, right? To make ideas memorable, to connect while maintaining the integrity of the ideas, not diluting it, or right, not taking out the deep meaning of an idea that might have complexity. But if we explain it in a overly complicated way, nobody's going to remember what we said. I'm wondering if there's an approach to saying, how do you put your ideas through the filter, I guess, and make sure they come out on the other side still representing the idea.
Well, let me give you some people like Einstein and Richard Feynman, who was a Nobel Prize
Mm-hmm.
winning in physics. So they use a tool called, so we're always trying to communicate, or almost always trying to communicate. In our own mind, we have all this understanding, but when we talk to somebody else, we assume they have the same understanding as us, but it isn't always true. And so if you can use a tool like a rhyme or a chiasmus, and it works. It sticks to the brain, and then people go, huh, interesting. Okay. And I'll give you some examples. Einstein said, stay away from negative people. They have a problem for every solution. Okay. It's a flip. He liked the chiasmus, which is the flip. He said, what is right is not always popular. What is popular is not always right. When you hear it that way, it's easier to understand and to relate to than, hey, come on, guys, what's right isn't always popular. So you're going to
Yeah.
hear it and go, okay, fine. But when you put it into this phrase, it sticks to the brain. And the brain, there's certain things that the brain can't relate and learn everything, because there's only a limited amount of space and
Right.
capability that we have. And so what happens is there are a lot of things that somebody says to us, and then 2 days later or 2 hours later, sometimes we forget what he said. Well, I kind of remember what he said. Let me think about it conceptually. But if you can trigger a part of the brain that actually holds it, it becomes easier to relate to. I'll give you, here's Richard Feynman, okay, the Nobel Prize guy. He said, I'd rather have a question that can't be answered than, sorry, I'd rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. Now, that's quite profound if you think about what he's saying.
Yeah.
He's saying, guys, I want you to have an open mind to this. Okay. But if he said that, maybe they'd relate, maybe they wouldn't. But it helps more when he says, I'd rather have questions that can't, I mean, going through that phrase, I'd rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. It makes the point more. He says, knowledge is not free. You have to pay attention. Free pay. Okay. The opposites. And it's just, and he would do this all the time, just like Einstein would. And they understood, as I'm learning and sharing with others, that, yeah, there are certain things that relate more, that stick to the brain. We don't realize it until I mean, I do it on the product side. So I understand, you want to wake up the brain. I have a TV next to my computer. I never have it on, but this one day I had it on for some bizarre reason. But I wasn't watching it. And they had a famous baseball player, I forget who it was, who was talking. And it was for a product called Blue Emu, which is like you rub it on your arms and your joints when you feel arthritis and stuff like that. And so he's talking, and then he says, Blue Emu, it works fast and you won't stink. What did he just say? And from that moment forward, I was really paying attention because I want to know, what is he talking about? Okay. And it's just trigger words. I'll go back to the naked thing. I mean, these two guys in Southern California created a juice, and they were competing with a major juice called Odwalla that was owned by Coca-Cola. It's still owned by Coca-Cola. So it's a massive, they've got tons of money to spend on advertising and everything else. So these guys recognized, we don't have the money to compete with Coca-Cola, but we want to get people, wake them up. Like, hey, it works fast and you won't stink. What? So you're in a store. What is it? So they decided to call it Naked Juice. Okay. And Naked Juice passed Odwalla to become the largest selling natural juice in America. But what they did was they recognized we need to wake up the brain. And so even though I look at the marketing side, so we talk a lot about marketing side, this is about persuasion. This is about talking to my kids and my family. This is talking about, if I say something, they go, okay, Dad, okay, fine. I mean, my kids are in their 30s now, but they're still, okay, fine. But if I say something and it rhymes, or a chiasmus or some of the tools, that it really helps. So I would say brain glue. So why brain glue? Because plain glue doesn't stick to the brain. Okay. Or how about this? Switch your pitch if you want to get rich. Okay. And I was thinking, what's rhymes? So what am I doing? I want a more advanced phrase. So I said, it really pushes passion, desire. Another word for passion is desire. So brain glue helps you light the fire of desire in your buyer. Now it sticks to the brain. It's a little easier to relate to. And in the beginning, I started to understand, like I was talking about, men are from Mars, women are from Venus, and those types of things, that's metaphors. But as I started uncovering these tools, I started recognizing O.J. Simpson was on his way to a murder. He was going to be thrown in jail for murder, right? And then Johnny Cochran, his attorney, it's actually Johnny Cochran's friend that gave him the tool. He said, if the glove doesn't fit, you have to acquit, okay? And of course, OJ was having trouble putting on the glove, and that must have been the murderer's glove. And there were two of the jurors after the trial, and they were asked, with all that evidence, and there was a lot of evidence against OJ, how do you find him not guilty? And one of them said, as the other one nodded her head in agreement, she said, well, we knew if the glove don't fit, you must acquit. The glove didn't fit, we had to acquit, okay? It sticks to the brain. And so, yeah, it's fascinating for me seeing, I'll take a senior exec and we're saying we're trying to sell something or explain something to our people. Well, let's even come up with a phrase that could say it, that would make it, more resonant. And they try it. It actually sometimes start laughing when we come up with something, but it works.
Yeah. What's the power of humor in all of this?
Okay. So there's oxytocin and cortisol. And if you get pissed off, if you get mad or scared, cortisol flows through your bloodstream and it stays there for up to 36 hours. And it really makes you resistant to all kinds of things. It stays with you. You have that feeling. And so then if somebody tries to sell you or present an idea and you're pissed off because, I don't know, your wife or your husband pissed you off yesterday, or a client, or who knows what it is, okay? You're going to be resistant. It looks like you're listening. No, go ahead. Tell me what you have. Okay. What do you want me to do? Okay. No, I don't think we want to do it. You become much more resistant. But oxytocin, if you can make somebody laugh, you trigger oxytocin, and oxytocin makes a person more resonant, more accepting. So let me give you an example. If I was doing a turnaround of boxing gloves of a martial arts equipment company, it was on the verge of going bankrupt, and so I worked with them for 6 months and turned them around. It was really great. But at the beginning, all the employees were terrified because they knew the company is in trouble. Okay, it was, I think, 38 employees, and the CEO, the owner, the founder was scared. He knew this was like my company's falling apart and I don't know what I'm going to do. So I told him a joke. They said James is here to help us grow the business. He does turnarounds, etc. And so the first thing I did was I told everybody a joke. A joke makes people much more receptive to what we're saying. Let me come back to this for a second. So I was talking to these three women and trying to explain something to them that we wanted them to do, and they were resistant to it. So I started with a joke, and they're quite religious. So I said, well, just before we start, can I share something with you? And they said, sure. And I said, so a little girl came up to mommy and said, Mommy, Daddy says we came from apes, but you say we came from Adam and Eve. Honey, Daddy's talking about his family. I'm talking about my family. So the three women started laughing like crazy, but they became much more receptive to what I said from that point forward. Well, so with the turnaround, I told the story of the serviceman is hiding in the service closet. And whenever people came up to the closet, near the closet, he'd open the door and scream, supplies, instead of surprise. Okay. 6 months later, 5 months later, and I remember this would happen quite a few times. I was looking inside the window of this woman and I could see how much stress she had. She was on the phone with, I guess, one of the clients or something, and she was really stressed. And then as soon as she hung up the phone, I said, well, can I come in? She said, oh, come on in. And as soon as I opened the door, she said, supplies. This was 5 months later. But because I was the supplies guy, I was the humor guy, because when she saw me, when the people would see me, it triggered oxytocin, because I would I'm a terrible joke teller, but I would come up with jokes and share with them that we want to share jokes too. But one of the things we find is when you use humor in a company, and you still want to be serious, there's lots of serious things you have to address for sure. When you use humor, it actually makes people more creative. And now I work with the R&D departments often with companies because they're trying to develop more products. You get them laughing instead of when they're really serious and looking and all that stuff, they tend to be less creative. It's amazing.
It's like it tracks as a technique to make it about them more than about yourself, and not if you have ideas that you to be effective, you need people to be interested in those ideas and think about them and want to use them. But if your mentality is everybody should just automatically be interested in what I have to say because I'm so smart and I know everything and whatever,
Good
then
luck with that.
it's right. You can't really make that breakthrough, and you might still get your fee. You
Right.
came, you did what you were supposed to do. I told everybody all my great ideas, and now it's up to them if they're going to do them. And the same thing with any leader in an organization, right? Where they might look at themselves and say, well, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I show up every day, I work hard, I demonstrate leadership, etc. But if nobody is, in fact, willing to be led, then you're not actually leading. And so many of these techniques strike me as I have to find a way to make them interested. I have to figure out what is the thing that either just puts us on level ground, right? That conveys some humility, that just gets us enjoying each other through humor, that shows my interest in how people learn and how things connect with them. And sometimes that's about, I guess, taking it one idea at a time and not not trying to do the brain dump where it's like, okay, here's 10 different things and hope you can take notes quickly, but saying, let's get this one thing down first. And once we have that, maybe we'll go to the next one. But let's focus on each idea, give each of them its own attention. And I would say that's what these techniques would do, right? That it's like, can you remember one thing really well? And once you have that, can you remember the next thing really well? And then you can build from there. And if you remember the core principle, you can learn more of the details around it, but we need to start with treating each of those ideas like they're precious and valuable in their own right, and being willing to, I guess there's times where it's being willing to or having the confidence to not appear as, I don't know, impressive or like that it might impress people if you use a lot of big words and you're able to communicate how smart you are, but they might not necessarily learn anything. But if you say, let's simplify, let's get it down to its core concepts, let's make it memorable, let's use some techniques. Sometimes people don't, in the moment, necessarily understand or appreciate what they're getting. I've seen examples before where it was like in ministry, for example, right? Where there's different styles, but in the moment, the person who really has a whole bunch of different ideas and can go into a lot of depth, that it's very impressive. And then a day later, you might not really remember much of what that sermon was about, for example, versus the one who kind of has three key points and is repeating them and reiterating them. It's while you're sitting there, you're okay, I get it. But then you actually do get it, right? Because the next day you'll remember what that was about. And so sometimes that's you have to understand, okay, the people I'm talking to right now, maybe they do or maybe they don't understand what this is all about. But tomorrow, when they still remember the ideas and when they're able to do it, it will have been a success. And so I think it really all tracks back to, again, particularly when we're talking ideas and it's intangible, right? That the results are in whether or not people were able to use those ideas and act on them. It's different than, selling a product where the results are, did people buy it? And so it really does take that reflection and that follow through and that to say, okay, I was successful in communicating this if people receive the message. Right.
Right. Well, and I want to go back to the humor thing just for a moment, but saying when cortisol goes through and we don't, when we're talking to somebody, we don't understand this. But if somebody gets mad, if I make him really pissed, you better listen to this. Okay, come on. It shuts down many parts of the brain. And so it becomes more resistant to what we're saying because it's like it's shutting down the brain. But you don't just have to make a person laugh. There are certain things that you tell a person that are fascinating that trigger oxytocin that make the brain open up. And what you want is you want all these different parts of the brain to open up, particularly the emotional sides of the brain, because that's where decisions are made. There are major studies that were uncovered that more than 90% of all decisions that we make are emotional, even financial decisions. And so what we want to do is we want to open the person's mind when we're talking to somebody. If we're, as a leader, we're communicating on a regular basis. And so we want people to understand things and give us feedback and let us know what's happening, et cetera, and be honest with us, et cetera. And and we want people to, if we feel that we're following something that's valuable. I saw a guy that had a T-shirt that said "Life sucks and then you die," and I'm like, no, I know somebody who could use that T-shirt, by the way, but most people know this is our life right now. And so if we're trying to communicate something, we want to make sure that the person is receptive to when we're
Mhm.
talking. They don't have to totally agree with what we're saying, but they have to be open, have an open mind to be receptive. Otherwise, we're talking and nobody's listening. We think they're listening, but they're not.
Yeah. How does your background in behavioral management help you in conveying these techniques and using them to effect?
I'm fascinated by the concept of human behavior and understanding. The first thing we have to understand is what people are resistant to. We pick goals, and I'll go back to this piece I was talking about with people resisting telling you I don't know how. Okay, that's part of it because so we say I want you to go from this point to this point. We're going to turn this company from a $10 million company to a $100 million company, whatever else. So the first thing they're going to say is, okay, sure, yeah, let's go. But in their mind, they're going, "Ooh, I've never done that before. I don't know all the things that we have to do and everything else." And it's scary. We don't realize it, but it is. We have, like, I work with famous people. I've worked with Saul Price, who founded the Price Club and Costco and all that stuff. And he brought me in, he and his team brought me in because the city of Burbank hated Costco, even though Costco was the largest taxpayer for them. And so because of that, the mayor of the city of Burbank said, I don't want him building a shopping center for us. Okay. And so he used me to convince them it was a $500 million shopping center to do this. So I have to, so what do I have to do to talk a guy who hates them? And I don't know why he hated them because they were the largest taxpayer. I mean, it's amazing. But, and he was a reasonable guy, Saul Price. But this guy, for whatever reason, something happened and it was, I am not going to, I hate the guy and I don't want him building a shopping center. Okay. You know, even though it's going to help you guys, I don't care. You know, it just, there's something that's locked up in his brain. And the first thing you have to do, the first thing I recognize I have to do is open it up. And it's here's one of the tools is you could talk about what they're saying. I mean, like I'll say it to you, that's a green shirt you're wearing. That's really cool. You look awesome with that shirt. I would say to him stuff that was not related. He knew I was representing Saul Price, but as I was talking to him, I started saying things like, you know, I was reading about your son or his daughter, and it's amazing. So he was expecting me to come out and fight. Come on, you got to let me do this. But I was opening his mind basically to make him, you know, more willing to chat. And then we started chatting and he started telling me personally some things. I don't want to go into it, but some of the personal things of why he didn't want to do it and everything else. And I talked him into it and we got half the shopping center that Saul Price is allowed to build. But yeah, it was just, we want to understand that when we're communicating to somebody, particularly if it's important, you know, sometimes you talk about a goal. Here's our goal, guys. We want to do this. You still want to present it in such a way that people are accepting what you're saying and be willing to be honest as far as that's concerned. So they're
Yeah.
comfortable with you.
Yeah.
I have it with one of my daughters. I have a son and three daughters. And our middle daughter, we gave her the initials LA for Lauren Asia, AJA. So we knew when we moved from Montreal to Southern California, how old is Lauren? That's how long we've been here. But Lauren told me, finally, she said, I'm the quiet one. And you're a consultant, so you ask questions all the time, but you never listen to me. I said, what? You know, I'm supposed to be this like I'm behavioral management specialist. We work with all these companies and everything. And here's my daughter telling me, she said, you're always trying to solve my problem instead of just listening. You know, if I say something, by you solving my problem, trying to solve my problem, it's like you're saying, you're stupid and daddy's smart. And daddy's going to tell you how to solve the problem instead of just saying, I know you're really smart. What do you think? And let me just tell you what's going on, or just shut up if I'm talking to you instead of trying to solve my problems. And I mean, I love her dearly and I've worked hard to improve that. But I had to learn that I was having this relationship issue with her, and not a terrible one because it wasn't so big and, you know, something terrible happened. It was subtle. And yet it was
Yeah.
profound as far as the relationship that we had. And that
Yeah.
has helped a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's an important point at the end there is that a lot of persuasion is not about persuading. It's about opening people up to the possibility of seeing another view, right? Or just being willing to engage with that idea. Very few people really want to be persuaded, but most people want to be right. So we need to give them an opportunity to discover what the right answer is, right? And sometimes that's the subtlety. I think that's a lot of what these techniques can do is it makes it kind of inescapable, but it's not confrontational for the most part, right? It's something that a lot of it's aspirational or it's kind of once it sticks in your brain, right? It's hard to get it out of there to say, oh, I thought this, but now I just can't get this other idea out of here. So maybe that's right. But certainly the behavioral management part of it, just having a conversation, determining if there is a moment to attempt to persuade this person, it has to be the right moment. If I just go right in and I start to make my case, okay, here's why I'm right and you're wrong, here's all the things, you're not going to move them at all. You're probably entrench them further because I don't like you, I don't like the way you approached me, and I don't care what you have to say. And I'm sure we all know examples of that where you would think, man, how this person, they just, what is going on? They don't seem interested in any evidence, any information. They're just entrenched, and there's no way you can't confront that person immediately with an alternative case. You have to be patient, I guess, right? And say, when is the time where we can have this conversation? What are some ideas I can plant? If I have trust in the fact that I do have a solid idea, solid argument. I'm confident in that. and I know that that will eventually speak for itself. But it has to be the right time and the right moment, right? But I think those are a lot of important things when it comes to persuasion, the science of persuasion, like what it means to persuade that, especially to change perspectives around some of the connotations of what people think about, either that it's pushy, that it's quote unquote that salesy thing. Why some people have some anxiety around sales, either be doing sales or feeling like they're being sold to. It's because they probably have, the way I say it is like, why is the stereotype of the uncomfortable sales situation around that used car salesman? What is it? It's because the implication is that the person knows they're selling you something that you really shouldn't buy, right?
Right.
It's I'm selling you something that has a problem with it and I'm trying to get you. But if you have something, whether it be an idea or a product or a service or whatever, and you know that it's quality, that it's serving that person if they have it, you should feel totally confident, and you should feel confident to just speak on the merits of it, and you find a way to have them understand that. But you have to have some naturalness to that approach, I would say. But I think that's all important here, and bringing it back to our listeners, because I'm sure there's people out there who think, I'm not good at this. I don't really even know if I want to be good at persuading, right? I just, every time I'm trying to do it, feel great about it, or I feel like I'm trying to twist people's arms, right? And if we were to visualize it, it's instead of having these oppositional forces, and I think one thing and you think the other, and let's go head to head and debate it. Let me put an aspirational target out here. Let me change what we're looking at, and then we're both saying, "Hey, what if we go toward that idea? Isn't that an appealing idea, right?" So it doesn't have to get into right, wrong. You're doing this, do this instead. It's just, hey, wouldn't this be interesting if we did this? Like, or isn't this a great idea? Or isn't this something that makes a lot of sense? And then it allows people to just kind of not worry about what they were doing before, thinking about, and focus on the new idea and focus on that. It's a way to, for those who have felt like they have struggled with this in the past, or have even, like, had a feeling where they were uninterested in it, or felt like it was just not something they wanted to do, that there's a different perspective on what persuasion can be, and understanding that if you're persuading people toward a common goal, toward a mission, toward really being motivated to act on positive things, then it's important to be able to persuade.
Well, there are two pieces to this. One is one of the most powerful tools we can use when we're trying to persuade someone is a sandwich, if we're trying to criticize somebody, where you say something positive and then you give them the feedback and then you tell them something positive. Oh, I love working with you. You're just one of the smartest people we have here. But you did have a problem with that product that you were doing or that thing that you were doing. And I think that we want to talk about that. But I want to let you know that I love working with you. Okay, so it's sandwich.
Mhm.
And that's the first thing. The second one is, which sort of goes along with this, is so I'm supposed to be this expert in marketing and obviously because of persuasion management and everything else. When Steve Jobs came up with a camera on the phone, I said, what a stupid idea. Who needs a camera on a phone? Boy, it was like, you should see how many pictures I have on my phone. But some of the greatest ideas, Steve Jobs loved Henry Ford. Henry Ford said, if I did what everybody asked, that I would have created faster horses,
Yeah.
not cars. Okay. And so we want to understand that in our life, if we do the same thing throughout our life, it may feel secure, but it also may feel tremendously boring. So what we want to do is we want to train ourselves and others to be able to move up, to be better, to enjoy, as the Japanese call it, the kaizen, which is continuous improvement, continuous getting better with what we're doing. And in order to do that, you want to create that environment with everybody that you're working with. Hey, we still want to be careful with what we're doing, but we still want to move to the next level or try stuff that we haven't tried before and see if that works, how that works. And then if somebody presents something that we don't totally agree with, let's say it was Steve Jobs saying, I want to put a flashlight on a phone. It's like, who wants a flashlight on a phone? And now we live by it, you know. I got on this call today because my timer went off here. It's like everything. I sleep with and wake up with my phone. I mean, but who would have thought that's what you want to put on a phone? And it's just our whole life is about. So I think of the things that my kids went through were different than what I went through. My grandfather, before he died, he was born in 1900. He said, I remember when somebody would drive a car into our neighborhood, I would run forward with all these other kids and scream, tie your horses, tie your horses. And I'm like, what? And I never realized, wow, he went through a time when people didn't have phones, cars, anything else. For us, so we're getting older, but pretty soon, certainly our kids or that generation is going to be surrounded by robots, AI and robots. I mean,
Hmm.
it's just like everything changes. And so we have to understand that if you think everything is going to stay the same, it's not. And things are going to happen. I mean, things happen that change all kinds of things in our lives. Don't be scared of it, but also don't be resistant to it, totally resistant to it, because some of it can be really wonderful. And some of it you have no choice over. We're going to have robots. I don't know. Hopefully it'll be my life that I'll experience it, but we see
Right.
them. Some of the robots, you ever seen them? It's amazing. Some of the images of they dance and cook now. They have these psychologists. Heard this thing on NPR radio, and it was they were talking about a psychology organization, and they created an AI training program. And this guy who's the CEO of the company, he said, I came in on a Saturday, and one of the programmers was actually sitting down and asking the robot that he programmed, he was one of the programmers, he was asking it for help because his relationship with his wife is falling apart. I said, I was listening to him and I couldn't believe that this guy, he programmed it, and
Yeah.
yet he's asking it for help.
Yeah. It's the world is changing.
You think?
James, it's been great talking to you here. And I think you've shared a lot of ideas that will be really helpful to listeners. If they're interested in learning more and certainly finding the book, we'll put the link below where they can find that on Amazon, wherever they get their books. But where can they learn more about you?
Well, it's certainly Brain Glue is available on Amazon. But if you go to yesbrainglue.com, we've got all kinds of content there that might be interesting. So yesbrainglue.com might be a fun place to start.
Excellent. Well, we'll put the links below to the website, to where you can find the book. And so you can go there and find that, learn a little bit more, get some of these techniques. There's a whole bunch of them throughout the book, things that you can practice, experiment with, test, try out, especially if you're having ideas that you're having a hard time getting them to catch on. Try some of these techniques and try different ways to communicate them, and it can really make a lot of difference. So listeners, I hope you'll check that all out. I also hope that if you're not already, please do subscribe to The Authority for more author interviews coming your way every week, or you can visit thepodcast.network to learn about all of our shows. James, thanks again for being here.
Oh, Ross, thank you so much for having me.
This episode was edited by Gage Sanderson.